Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening up a stack of documents that feels a little heavier than usual. We've got these architectural blueprints from the 1820s that look like something out of a medieval fantasy.
They really do. And we also have sociological reports,
Mhm.
journals from Quaker reformers, and even some travel diaries from Charles Dickens.
It is a heavy stack, yeah, because it deals with a heavy subject. But it's also one that I found really surprising. It sort of challenges a fundamental assumption that I think we all have about the justice system.
It absolutely does.
And to sort of get into the right headspace for this, I want to try a little visualization exercise with you. So, unless you are driving, please keep your eyes on the road, but otherwise, maybe close your eyes for a second.
Okay.
I want you to picture a prison. What comes to mind? Like immediately.
Oh, I think for most people, it's the Hollywood standard, right?
Yeah.
Steel bars, razor wire, clanging metal doors.
Yeah, noise, overcrowding, maybe a riot in the mess hall.
Exactly.
Yes.
Chaos, containment, and punishment.
Okay. Now, I want you to just wipe that image away completely and picture a monastery.
A monastery, okay.
High stone walls, but peaceful. Vaulted ceilings, absolute total silence. A single beam of sunlight coming down from a skylight. A monk sitting alone in his cell, just contemplating.
It sounds serene, almost beautiful in a way.
And this is the hook for today's deep dive. We are looking at the moment in history where those two worlds just collided, because the modern prison, the correctional facility, it wasn't originally designed to act as a cage for the body.
No, not at all. It was just explicitly designed as a monastery for the criminal.
Yeah.
A machine built to save the soul.
That is the core insight here, isn't it? We just assume prisons have always been these warehouses for people, but these documents show that the invention of the penitentiary was actually a radical, progressive, religious experiment.
You could even call it a religious technology.
Religious technology, I love that. It implies they thought they could, like, engineer salvation if they just built the walls correctly.
They really, truly did. And the sources we have today, specifically focusing on this Pennsylvania system and the famous Eastern State Penitentiary, they show us that this experiment was incredibly well-intentioned.
It was meant to be the humanitarian alternative to the brutality of the 1700s.
Yes, but as we're going to find out, good intentions can pave the road to some very dark places.
Absolutely. So let's start with that before picture. To understand why anyone would build a solitary confinement prison and think it was kind, we have to understand what they were reacting against.
Right.
We have descriptions here of the old system in the late 1700s, looking at places like the Walnut Street Jail in Philadelphia.
And we should be clear, in the 18th century, jail wasn't really the punishment itself. It was more like the waiting room.
The waiting room? For what?
You stayed there until your trial, or until your execution, or, until you paid off a debt.
And the conditions sound just horrific. The sources call them schools of crime.
And that's a very literal description. In these old jails, there was no segregation at all. You had men, women, and children all just thrown into one large, open holding pen.
Wow.
So you've got debtors who just owed a bit of money sitting right next to hardened murderers. You had first-time offenders mixing with career criminals.
So it was basically a networking event for the criminal underworld?
Precisely. If you went in for, say, a minor theft, you came out knowing how to pick locks, how to counterfeit currency, how to commit burglary. It was a breeding ground.
And the wildest part in the documentation has to be the garnish system.
The garnish, yes.
This blew my mind. Walk us through this, because it sounds like organized crime inside the jail itself.
It effectively was. Because the jailers weren't well paid, or sometimes not paid at all, they just let the inmates run the asylum. So when a new prisoner arrived, the other inmates would literally strip them of their clothing.
What?
Yeah. And to get your clothes back, or to just have basic protection, you had to pay a fee.
And that money didn't go to the guards?
No, it went to the other prisoners. And they used it almost exclusively to buy liquor. So picture this. You're thrown into a dark, crowded room, you're immediately robbed by your cellmates, and everyone around you is drunk.
A total nightmare. And that's just the holding cell. The actual punishments were public spectacles, weren't they?
Oh, yes. This was the era of the whipping posts, the stocks, branding irons. The sources talk a lot about the wheelbarrow men law of 1786.
The wheelbarrow men? That sounds like a folk band or something.
Definitely not. Prisoners were chained to wheelbarrows and forced to repair public streets in Philadelphia. They were shaved, dressed in these funny, distinctive clothes, and just put on display.
Well, the there was public shame, right? If we humiliate them, they'll reform.
Exactly. But the sources show it backfired spectacularly.
Oh, so.
Well, instead of feeling shame, the prisoners got angry. They'd get into shouting matches or brawls with the crowds watching them.
And the crowds.
Worse, the crowds often started sympathizing with the criminals. They'd mock the guards, they'd cheer for the prisoners. So the state is trying to show its power, but it's actually just creating a riot.
It's undermining its own authority.
Exactly. It hardened the criminals and corrupted the public. So you have this total disaster of a system, drunken chaos inside, violent spectacle outside.
And into this mess enter the disruptors. We have this group forming in 1787 called the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons.
Which is a bit of a mouthful.
A branding nightmare, but it gets the point across.
It's very Quaker. Direct and descriptive.
And the Quakers, or the Religious Society of Friends, they are the key to this whole pivot. We can't understand the modern prison without understanding their theology.
That's right. The Quakers had this very specific concept called the inner light.
The inner light.
Yes. They believe that there is a spark of the divine, that of God, in everyone.
Even the guy who just robbed a bank.
Even the murderer. Even the wheelbarrow man. The Quakers argued that these people weren't beasts to be broken. They were souls that had been corrupted by their environment.
So their theory was, the criminal isn't evil, the criminal is just distracted.
That's a great way to put it. They believed the evil influences were the problem. The bad company, the alcohol, the noise of the city.
So the logic followed. If you remove all that noise,
You cut off all the bad influences.
then the person is left with nothing but themselves.
Exactly. And if you are forced to sit in silence with your own conscience, the Quakers believed you would inevitably encounter God. You would feel penitence.
And that brings us to the word itself, penitentiary. I think we use that word so much we forget what it actually means.
It's not just another word for jail. It comes from the root penitence, repentance. A penitentiary was literally designed to be a house of repentance.
And there's one figure in the documents who really pushes this idea. Dr. Benjamin Rush. He's a signer of the Declaration of Independence, a huge figure in American history, and he's proposing this machine for morality.
Rush is really the architect of the philosophy here. He was a physician, and he saw crime almost like a disease that could be cured. He proposed a building that was remote from the city. He even suggested the architecture should be gloomy and imposing.
He wanted to scare them straight?
Not physically. He wanted to create moral terror. He argued that solitude and silence were far more effective than the whip because the whip only hurts the body. Silence forces the mind to confront itself.
It's a very Enlightenment idea, isn't it? Using reason and architecture to fix the human machine.
It is. So they decided to bet the farm on this idea. In 1829, they opened Eastern State Penitentiary on a cherry orchard just outside Philadelphia. And looking at the photos in our source stack, this place is intense.
It's massive.
Huge, designed by the architect John Haviland. The exterior looks like a medieval fortress, giant stone walls, castle towers, arrow slits.
It just screams, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here."
It does. But that was the trick. The outside was meant to intimidate, but the inside was meant to be a sanctuary. Haviland used something called a radial plan.
Okay, describe that for us.
Imagine a wagon wheel. You have a central hub, and radiating out from it are 7 long corridors, like spokes.
And in the center hub.
A surveillance point.
Uh-huh.
A single guard standing in that center spot can see down all 7 hallways at once. It's all about control and visibility.
But the real technology wasn't the hallway. It was the cell. And these were not the cages we see in movies today.
No, not at all. They were small rooms, maybe 8 by 12 feet, but with high vaulted ceilings. They had central heating, which was incredibly rare in the 1820s, and running water and flush toilets.
So in some ways they lived better than the average person in Philadelphia.
In terms of amenities, yes, except they couldn't leave. And there was one architectural feature in the cell that just drives the religious point home: the eye of God.
The skylight.
Yes, the skylight. In every cell, there was a single glass opening in the ceiling, and it was the only source of light. There were no windows on the walls. You couldn't see the ground. You couldn't see the horizon.
So you were forced to look up.
Literally and metaphorically. The architecture was manipulating your gaze toward heaven.
It's such heavy-handed symbolism. But this Pennsylvania system, this separate system, it went way beyond just the building. The rules about anonymity were incredibly strict.
This is the part that feels most alien to us now. The goal was the total erasure of the self. When a prisoner arrived, his name was replaced with a number.
And the hoods. Tell us about the hoods.
Yes, this detail always gives me a chill. If a prisoner had to leave his cell for any reason, say, to go to the infirmary, he was forced to wear a full hood over his head.
Like a mask.
Exactly. The idea was that no prisoner should ever see the face of another prisoner. They wanted to prevent that school of crime contamination.
So the theory was, if you serve your time and get out, no one you did time with will even know you were there. You can start fresh.
It's benevolent in theory, but in practice, it means you are just utterly alone. 23 hours a day in that cell.
And the 24th hour.
Spent in a tiny, walled-off exercise yard attached to the back of your cell. You saw no one. You spoke to no one.
What did they do all day? That sounds maddening.
They worked. But again, the Quakers flipped the script on this. In the old system, hard labor was the punishment. In the Pennsylvania system, labor was a privilege.
How so?
Well, if you misbehaved, they wouldn't hit you. They would take away your tools. They would leave you in total idleness. And after days of staring at the wall, you would beg for work. You'd beg to make shoes or weave cloths just to have something to do.
So work becomes the relief from the suffering rather than the suffering itself. That is some serious psychological engineering.
It is. And the only human voices you ever heard were the warden, the physician, or the moral instructor, which was basically the chaplain.
So it really was an involuntary monastery.
They honestly believed they were saving these men. They looked at the filth and violence of the old jails and thought, this is clean, this is quiet, this is safe.
But you know, the thing about great ideas is that usually someone else has a different one. The sources detail this massive rivalry between the Pennsylvania system and the Auburn system up in New York.
Oh yeah, this was the Pepsi versus Coke of 19th century penology. While Pennsylvania was doing this solitary monastic experiment, New York established the Auburn system.
And what was their philosophy?
Auburn was congregate but silent.
Congregate but silent. That sounds like a contradiction. How does that work?
It does. The prisoners slept in tiny separate cells at night, but during the day they worked together in big factory workshops. But, and this was the absolute rule, they were forbidden from speaking.
So you're standing next to a guy for 10 hours making furniture and you can't say a single word.
Not a whisper. They had to look down. They walked in lockstep, this kind of shuffled march where you're practically stepping on the heels of the guy in front of you.
How on earth do you enforce silence in a factory full of criminals? You can't rely on the honor system.
You use the whip. And this is the key difference. Pennsylvania relied on walls and architecture to control the prisoner. Auburn relied on the guard and the lash.
So Pennsylvania is psychological control, Auburn is physical control. Which one won?
Well, if you look at the American prison system today, Auburn won.
Why? Because of the money.
Purely economics. The Auburn system was a factory. It turned a massive profit for the state because you could do industrial scale production. The Pennsylvania system was incredibly expensive to build, all those big cells, the plumbing, and you couldn't mass produce anything with guys working alone in their rooms.
So capitalism defeated idealism.
Essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
Across America, the Auburn model became the standard because it was cheaper and more efficient. But, and this is really interesting, Europe fell in love with the Pennsylvania model.
Correct.
Oh, yes. Delegations from England, France, Prussia, they all traveled to Philadelphia just to see Eastern State. They saw it as the height of humanitarian progress. They went back and built replicas of it all over the world.
Humanitarian progress. That phrase keeps coming up. But now we have to pivot to the reality check because we have a very famous visitor in the source stack who did not buy the hype.
Charles Dickens.
Charles Dickens. He visits in 1842. And usually tourists loved this place. But Dickens, not so much.
He hated it. He wrote this scathing critique in his travelogue, American Notes.
I have the quote here. He called the system cruel and wrong. He said, I hold this slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain to be immeasurably worse than any torture of the body.
Tampering with the mysteries of the brain. Dickens just nailed it. He saw what the Quakers in their good intentions had missed.
Which was what?
The theology of the inner light assumes that if you go deep enough inside yourself, you'll find God. But human beings are fundamentally social animals.
So if you cut off that connection to other people,
you don't necessarily find God. You might find madness. The sources are filled with reports of mental anguish, hallucinations, insanity. Prisoners would just become catatonic.
And the administration denied it, I'm guessing?
For a long time, yes. They blamed the prisoners. They'd say, oh, he was already crazy when he got here, or he's faking it. But the evidence was just overwhelming. The silence wasn't purifying them, it was breaking them.
So the Noble experiment was failing on a human level, but it also failed on a logistical level.
Right. the population kept growing. They couldn't build these expensive monastic cells fast enough. So eventually they had to start putting 2 men in a cell.
And the moment you put 2 men in a
The
cell,
silence is broken. The anonymity is gone. The monastery just evaporates, and it becomes a prison with really high ceilings.
it is such a tragic irony. The Quakers wanted to end the violence of the body, the whipping post, and they inadvertently invented a violence of the mind. They invented solitary confinement, thinking it was a kindness.
And that is the complex legacy we're left with. Eastern State Penitentiary eventually abandoned the separate system officially in 1913, though it had been eroding for years. It operated as a regular congregate prison until 1970.
But the echoes of that experiment are still with us. We still use solitary confinement today, in supermax prisons, in the whole.
We do, but the context is completely flipped. In the 1830s, the isolation was the treatment. It was the path to salvation. Today, solitary is used for punishment or containment.
We have a source here from the AFSC, the American Friends Service Committee, which is a modern Quaker organization, and they share the story of a man named Ohore Lutalo.
Lutalo spent 22 years in solitary confinement in a modern prison. His description is, it's haunting. He calls it no-touch torture.
That's a powerful phrase.
He describes the lights being on 24/7, the air kept freezing cold. It's sensory deprivation, but without any of the, benevolent intent of the 19th century. The religious justification evaporated, but the stone box remained.
It's like we kept the hardware, the cell, the isolation, but we threw out the software. The moral instruction, the hope for redemption.
That's the perfect analogy. The penitence part of the penitentiary is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Modern solitary isn't about saving the soul. It's about managing a population that the system just doesn't know what to do with.
So if we look back at this whole arc, what's the big takeaway? We went from the chaos of the colonial jail where everyone is drunk and fighting to the silence of the Quaker cell to the modern supermax.
I think the lesson is about the danger of simple solutions to complex human problems. The road to the modern prison was paved with good intentions. These weren't sadists who built Eastern State. They were reformers.
And they did redefine the prisoner from a body to be punished to a soul to be saved. That was a huge leap forward.
It was. But their error was in the method. They thought they could engineer salvation through architecture. They thought you could cure the human condition by putting it in a box. And history, and Charles Dickens, showed us that you cannot force an epiphany.
You certainly can't force it with a hood and a stone wall.
No. You need community. You need connection. The very things they stripped away were the things that are actually needed for rehabilitation.
You know, it makes you look at those old stone walls differently. If you go to Philadelphia today, you can tour Eastern State. It's a ruin now, but it's still standing.
It is hauntingly beautiful. It really does feel like a cathedral.
It does. And I encourage everyone listening to look up photos of that wagon wheel design in those cells. But here's the thought I want to leave you with.
Go for it.
We started this deep dive imagining a monastery, a place of silence and light. But if you take that design and you strip away the eye of God skylight, and you take away the moral instructor, are we left with a system that was designed to break the mind without any mechanism left to save the soul?
That is the question the ruins leave us with. And I think the answer is uncomfortably clear.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.